On a chilly evening, George sat alone on a weathered park bench, the weight of his solitude pressing heavily upon him. Winter had cast its icy grip over the town, and the world around him seemed as cold as the emptiness he felt inside. As he gazed into the swirling snowflakes, a soft whimper broke the silence. Turning his head, George spotted a small dog, its coat matted and dirty, with a white patch on its chest reminiscent of the golden retriever he and his late wife, Martha, had cherished during their early years of marriage. The sight stirred something deep within him, a vulnerability that echoed Martha's voice in his mind, reminding him of the love they had shared. "Sometimes God places angels in our path when we need them most," she used to say. With his heart swelling with emotion, George leaned forward and spoke gently to the dog. "Come with me. I have a warm place for you filled with infinite care." As he removed his coat and fashioned it into a makeshift basket, George was surprised when the dog, whom he would later name Maggie, allowed him to pick her up. He cradled her in the fabric, feeling her warmth seep into his own. One by one, he gathered her puppies, each receiving soft words and tender touches, creating a bond that neither had expected. Maggie hesitated at first, glancing nervously between her puppies and the man who held them so carefully. But after a moment, she stepped toward him, limping slightly, a sign of the injuries she had endured. "Let's go home," he said, and for the first time in months, the word home felt alive, filled with promise and hope. Together they set off into the falling snow, 6 lonely hearts embarking on a journey that would forever alter their lives. The trek to George's house felt longer than ever, each step a careful calculation. As he balanced the precious bundle in his arms, Maggie followed closely, ignoring her own pain to stay near her puppies. The snow fell heavier, transforming the suburban streets into a silent white maze. Upon arriving at his small red brick house on Maple Street, George noticed that the lights inside, once a reminder of his loneliness, now felt welcoming. He opened the door, and warmth enveloped them like a long-awaited embrace. "Welcome," he murmured, watching as Maggie hesitated on the threshold, leaving tiny wet paw prints on the doormat that read, "Home Sweet Home." With a gentle whistle, he encouraged her to enter. She took cautious steps, her nose twitching as she absorbed the new sense of the space that would now be her haven. In the living room, George quickly fashioned a nest with old blankets near the fireplace. He transferred the puppies from his coat to the soft shelter, marveling at their tiny golden bodies, each with its own distinct personality. The smallest, with the white patch, he secretly named Braveheart. The shy female with drooping ears hid behind her siblings. The sturdy one full of energy explored the edges of the nest, and the last, who clung closely to Braveheart. Maggie watched intently, torn between her instinct to protect her puppies and the exhaustion that finally began to overtake her. Sensing her hesitation, George stepped back, giving her the space to approach the nest on her own. He returned from the kitchen with a bowl of fresh water and some leftover chicken. "Martha always said visitors should be well fed," he said, placing the food near Maggie. She looked at him with expressive eyes before starting to eat with controlled hunger, clearly famished but retaining her dignity. The following days brought a gradual transformation to the house that had long been frozen in time. The guest room, once a storage space for memories, was reorganized to accommodate the new K9 family. Photographs of Martha, previously covered in dust, seemed to smile as they observed the new life blossoming under their roof. Each puppy began to reveal its true nature. Braveheart, the natural leader, was always the first to investigate new sounds. His sister, whom George named Luna for her nocturnal tendencies, slowly shed her shyness during bedtime cuddles. The energetic Max rushed to the food bowl at the sound of kibble, while Charlie, the gentle one, followed Braveheart on his adventures. Maggie surprised George the most. As her physical wounds healed, her spirit began to shine. Each morning she waited patiently by his bed until he woke, as if ensuring he was okay. During their nightly walks, she walked precisely where Martha used to, her step perfectly synchronized with his. One afternoon, while George organized old photo albums in the living room, Maggie entered the room that had belonged to Martha. From the doorway, he watched as she gently explored the space, her nose delicately touching objects that still carried his late wife's scent. When she lay down at the foot of Martha's old vanity, silent tears streamed down George's face. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. "You feel it too, don't you?" he whispered to Maggie, as if she had orchestrated this miraculous reunion. She raised her head and looked at him with deep understanding, and in that moment, George knew his house had become a home again. The transformation was more than physical. It was as if the very air in the house had changed, now filled with a new energy of life and hope. Laughter echoed through the halls, replaced by happy barks and the sound of little paws scurrying across the wooden floor. But one night, a fierce storm swept through, howling winds and plummeting temperatures threatening their newfound happiness. George had just added more wood to the fireplace when he heard a crack, followed by silence. The central heating had failed. "No, no, no," he muttered, rushing down to the basement. The icy air hit him like a slap as he opened the door to find the old boiler had finally given out. Panic surged through him as he checked his phone. It was -5 degrees Celsius outside, and the temperature inside was dropping. His thoughts immediately turned to the puppies, still too young to withstand such cold. Climbing back up the stairs, he found Maggie agitated, her amber eyes filled with concern. The puppies, now 6 weeks old, were starting to shiver even near the fireplace. "I need to get help," he said, more to himself than to Maggie. The heating technician lived just a few blocks away, but the storm had turned the streets into an Arctic scene. Wrapping himself in his heaviest coat, he opened the door, but a gust of wind nearly knocked him over. Snow fell sideways, visibility reduced to mere meters. "Stay with them," he gently commanded Maggie. "I'll be right back." But as he stepped outside, he felt her presence beside him, her determination clear. Together they fought against the storm, each step a battle against the biting wind. George kept one hand in front of his face, trying to see through the white curtain of snow while Maggie walked close, her body a reassuring anchor. Halfway there, George slipped on a hidden ice patch and fell hard, pain shooting through his ankle. Panic began to set in. It was too cold to stay still, but the pain made it impossible to walk. His fingers, even inside his gloves, were starting to lose feeling. Maggie began barking urgently, her strong voice piercing through the storm. She ran ahead, then turned, barking even louder. George realized she was trying to call for help. Just then, lights flickered on in a nearby house, and a familiar voice shouted through the storm. It was Ted, the heating technician, drawn out by Maggie's barks. "George, my God! What are you doing out here?" Ted shouted, rushing toward him with a flashlight, concern etched on his face. "The boiler, the puppies," George managed to say through chattering teeth. Ted helped him to his feet, and with Maggie leading the way, they made it back to the house. While Ted worked on the boiler, George watched as Maggie checked on each puppy, licking them to warm them up. She only relaxed when the familiar hum of the heating returned, warmth gradually spreading through the home. That night, as everyone slept safe and warm, George reflected on how Maggie, once an abandoned dog, had become his guardian. "Martha would be proud of you," he whispered, stroking Maggie's head as she rested near his armchair. "You saved me as much as I saved you." As spring arrived, significant changes swept through the household on Maple Street. The puppies, now 12 weeks old, had grown strong and healthy, ready for their own adventures. George knew it was time to find loving homes for them, though the thought of separating the family tugged at his heart. With the help of the local veterinary clinic, he organized a careful adoption process. Luna was the first to find her new home, with a family that had a shy little girl, almost as if they were meant for each other. Max was adopted by a young athletic couple who promised to channel his energy into long runs at the park. Charlie, always inseparable from Braveheart, found a place with George's neighbors, allowing the brothers to keep their special bond. But Braveheart, the smallest and most courageous, had a different fate. On a sunny morning, as George prepared the adoption papers, Maggie gently picked him up by the scruff and carried him into Martha's old room. She placed him on the vintage reading chair and looked at George with those eyes he now understood so well. "You want him to stay, don't you?" George asked, feeling tears welling in his eyes. Maggie responded by pressing her nose to his hand, while Braveheart curled up in the chair as if he had always belonged there. The house on Maple Street found a new rhythm. Evening walks in the park became a trio, with Braveheart proudly trotting between George and Maggie. Weekends, filled with visits from the other puppies, turned the backyard into a joyful gathering spot. One afternoon, watching Maggie play with her now-grown puppies, George realized how completely his life had transformed. The loneliness that once consumed him had been replaced by a different kind of love, unconditional, loyal, and profoundly healing. "You were right, Martha," he whispered to the spring blue sky. "Sometimes angels come in unexpected forms." Surrounded by joyful barks and hearts filled with love, George knew he had found his second chance at happiness. 1 year later, the house at 28 Maple Street had become a neighborhood landmark. Every Saturday morning, George, Maggie, and Braveheart could be seen volunteering at the local animal shelter. Maggie, with her gentle nature, had a special gift for soothing the most fearful dogs, while Braveheart, true to his courageous spirit, became the perfect playmate for newly arrived puppies. The old park bench where it all began now bore a small plaque, "Love finds its way," in memory of Martha Thompson. It was a surprise organized by the neighbors who had witnessed not only the transformation of the house, but of George himself. The other puppies visited regularly, each bringing their own story of joy. Luna had overcome her shyness and now helped children with anxiety at a local school. Max competed in agility trials with his trainer, while Charlie remained the neighborhood's most beloved visitor. On quiet nights, when the moon bathed the garden in silver light, George often thought about how a single moment of compassion could change not just one life, but create ripples of kindness that reached far beyond what he could see. As he looked at Maggie and Braveheart, he knew that love in all its forms was the most powerful force of all.